Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Levsha Podcast. It's the place where we meet the people from all over the world and talk about culture, about localization, translation, video games, languages, and try to share some knowledges and discuss some interesting things. My name is Fedor Bonchesmalovsky, and today with us we have Diego Perez, a localization specialist from Brazil. And now I'll just put the ball to Diego and ask him to talk, to tell us something just about what he actually does and how did he came to it and what is his daily business. So Diego, please.
Okay, thank you, Fedor. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for everyone who's listening to us. I'm like you said, I'm Diego Perez. I've been a localization specialist in video games for 8 years now. Today, I'm working as a freelancer mainly, but I'm also working in a part-time contract in the localization of Kenshi 2. It's an RPG with a strategy component from England, and this is my main project working on right now.
So you tell that you're a game localizer for 8 years.
Yes.
And I myself, I can say that I'm a game localizer for 18 years. Oh
wow.
My God! Yes, if I started to making kids just instead of game localization, then my first kid that just should be already in the university. But please let us know what did you lead into this business, and how did you become a game localizer?
Sure. So when I was out of school, I had a dream of becoming a narrative designer for games. But at the time, I don't think that term narrative designer was really a thing in the industry. I was more into script writing and writing things for RPGs, which is my main, my favorite game genre, let's say it. So I graduated from English language and literature in university. But when I graduated, the narrative designer path was not open to me at the time. But I still had to make money somehow. So I had studied translation in the university. So I started translating, but not from video games initially. So I met somewhere during my graduation years who already was in the translation business. So I started working with technical translation at first, translating manuals and things like that. I think that a lot of old school translators in video games probably started that way, because it's not, at least for me, I wasn't aware that there was such a thing as a game localization industry at the time. But when I started translating, I had about 1 year of experience at that time. So as I started getting into contact with the translation community as a whole, and that's when I realized I could localize games. And that was probably, at the time, it was like a missing piece of a puzzle, because I was studying language to work with video games, but I hadn't yet found a way to. So that's when I realized, I can translate video games. I have studied translation. I am an avid gamer since I was little, so I think that's the path for me right now. And ever since I joined the industry at that time, actually, Levsha was one of my first companies at the time, almost 8 years ago. And I found you through ProZ, if I'm not mistaken, at the time, which is a language portal that has helped a lot of professionals everywhere in the world. So that's when I first approached Levsha with my curriculum, and then we started working together. It was, I think, one of my first companies at the time. So that's basically how I got into the localization industry. I already had a curriculum of translation. I had the right graduation to do that. So it was, and I believe at the time the number of people doing localization at the time was not as much as it is nowadays. So I believe it was probably easier to get into, from what I hear about people who are trying to get into the translation industry, game localization industry right now.
Thank you, Diego, for this extensive story. You mentioned that you plan to be a narrative designer, and I can say that. So we have seen a piece of narrative design about your life, and so if you select in video game localization simulator or RPG or just whatever, if you select Diego, then we have a solid piece of story behind it. And it leads me to some questions that are really interesting for me, and I hope that they will be really interesting for our audience, namely. So first of all, that as I've mentioned in the beginning, and the aim of the whole thing is to get views, get understanding of the world. It's very, very different in its various parts. And so what was game industry in Brazil like then you started, and how it evolved since that time? It's one part of the question. And the second part is what do you think, as you are a gamer? Is there something special about gamers it's in Brazil, and what can be, so if we make a game, yes, and we want to touch people from Brazil, so what should we include, or what should we exclude, and what topics we shouldn't touch? So just, it's interesting.
Thank you. So about the first question, I think game localization industry in Brazil was already booming when it started, because of all the indie games and digital games, digital products. But I think it has gone one step further from 8 years from now, because there's been a lot of more demand for work in Portuguese, because developers all around the world have started to realize the potential market in Brazil, because we have 200 million people here. I'm not sure exactly the number of which of them are gamers, but I know for a fact that especially for mobile games, Brazil is one of the largest population in gaming. So Brazilian Portuguese has been one of the main languages that developers have chosen to localize. And that can be seen, for example, when you browse the Steam page and you start browsing games, you'll see that Brazilian Portuguese is available to most of them. So this has been a good language for localizers, for developers to localize in, and it has been a good market for Brazilian translators. I believe that right now it's one of the most in-demand translation work if you take into consideration everything. So game localization, software localization as a whole, I think this is the place translators want to be right now. About the second question, you mentioned sensitive topics in Brazil. Brazil is more flexible to sensitive topics. We do not have a lot of restrictions regarding religion or politics. We do have our own feuds inside here. Let's say it, but people are not very particular about some sensitive topics in Portuguese. So we don't usually have to do a lot of adaptation to the language, especially if they are from Western developers. The society values, let's say it, are more similar to what we have here. Right. So I think the main challenge when localizing languages is really to to find the cultural references that are relevant to Brazilian speakers. Sometimes the developers use references of their own country, and then we have to find a way to localize them to Portuguese, because not always our audience is familiar with a reference, especially if they are too niche for the developer's country. Then we have to adapt that. I hope I answered.
I see. Yeah. Thank you, Diego. But actually, I wanted to, regarding the second part, it's not even just about what you don't like, but more about what you like. So, just for example, there are some knowledge and some studies, yes, that just for example, for Eastern gamers, yes, if we go to China, Korea, then we need to make it fast, to make it very colorful. Otherwise, it will not be very well received. Yeah, there are some countries there. Racing is particularly popular, yes, and so just if we make a game and that maybe there are some special, just I don't know, topics, mechanics, or just something. What would you recommend for Brazil? So if you just have a chance that guys that make the best video game, I would like just to play. Yes, of course, it's not about studies, or I'm not asking you about some numbers, just your personal feeling. You Diego Perez, how you feel it?
So I would say that as a business model, I've heard that free-to-play games are hugely popular here. Gamers here are really hesitant to pay for a game, especially for a mobile game. So they are willing to spend money in their game, but that first barrier of having to pay to start playing the game, that's something that Brazilians tend to avoid because of economical factors. So people usually want to play a free game, and if they like it, then they will be willing to pay for cosmetics or for developing their cities. And in that sense, mobile games here are really popular when we're talking about social games that involve other people, friends they are playing with. So this is something that is really powerful here in Brazil. And talking about game genres specifically and outside mobile games, I would say shooting games here are truly popular, and battle royale like Fortnite and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. All these games, they have been really popular here, and especially Counter-Strike from very a lot of years ago. I remember when I was still a teenager, and we would all go to LAN houses to play Counter-Strike, and this is Brazil has gone on to keep playing that kind of game from years from now. And if I'm not mistaken, we had our teams, we won the CS Global. I don't know if it was 1 year ago, 2 years ago. I'm not. I don't usually watch CS, but I know that these things are happening. And we also like a lot of MOBAs, right? Where the Brazilians really enjoy League of Legends and other variants, even if it's on mobile.
Thank you, Diego. And another question from that's interesting for me, because I don't know really much about it. What's the situation with development and publishing in Brazil? So, are there any known local studios, big local studios, or the big local publishers that are not more local? They work like a global company. So, big gaming companies in Brazil. Some interesting names, because I guess that in 200 million people economy there should be something.
Yeah, yes, we have a lot of studios here. They are not that big. I don't know if they probably range somewhere from 5 to 50 people. but not that much bigger than that. And I think that the main studio now, that it was even a trending topic last week, was Aquiris, which was recently acquired by Epic Games, and they will be the Epic Games Brazil. Everyone in the game developing industry in Brazil is really curious to see what the next steps are for Aquiris, and I think they are the big name right now in Brazilian game development studios. And but the curious thing about game studios here is that they are the games that we develop are usually developed in English first, and then they are localized to Portuguese. Sometimes not by the Brazilian people who wrote the game in English. I found that very curious, and I've heard that some other countries have this kind of thing too, where national developers prefer to develop the game English first and then localize to Brazil, either by a language service provider or by themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and my question is, and if you have just ever seen this English from the Brazilian developer, so how it usually looks like. Just because I have many experience with games that have been developed not by English-speaking teams and not by English-speaking narrative designers, and politely speaking, results could be controversial of this activity. What's your experience here, and if you just ever worked with Brazilian studios, helping them to achieve better English or better gaming language, whatever?
We have some pretty good narrative designers who write in English. Some of them are not even living in Brazil anymore, and they just provide remote work for Brazilian game studios. But aside from that, I believe the bigger studios, at least, they have an external proofreader or reviewer that is a native English speaker, and they usually go over the text and make sure it doesn't have any mistakes or that it reads fluently in English, because like you said, it's pretty easy to see when you have the English text that was written by a non-native, and you'll see some curious constructions or word choices here and there. So they usually tend to hire some English native speaker to take a look at the files and see if there's anything that could be improved. So they would act more like a consultant. But I believe that since we have many smaller studios here in Brazil, I suspect not all of them can afford such service. And of course, in this case, you may find some awkward things written in English.
Thank you, Diego. And continuing the topic of Brazilian games, if I'd ask you about the most known, the biggest, the main Brazilian game, what would you name?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that right now, probably Wonderbox. Wonderbox was developed by Aquiris that I mentioned before, that was acquired by Epic Games. And Wonderbox was released, if I'm not mistaken, in Apple mobile devices. And Wonderbox is a game that the players can create their own narrative and their own story. So they can, they have access to a lot of assets that they can create their scenarios. They can create characters and write their script and do things like that. It's simpler than Dreams by Sony, that was released, I believe 4 years ago. But it's more accessible because it's more user friendly because it's available on mobile devices mainly, so users can create their story more easily.
Very interesting, because I have never heard about it, frankly, just maybe because I don't have an Apple device, but who knows, I'll check. And just a question to continue it. So if you split it into two questions, and first is the main challenges you usually encounter then localizing into Brazilian Portuguese. And the second part that you probably encountered, the awkward situations. Then developers tried to picture Brazil in their games, and that picture that they draw doesn't resemble reality at any time. So some interesting examples would be very good to hear.
That's a very interesting question. For the first one, I think the main challenges in Brazil, localizing into Brazilian Portuguese, is of course character limitations and gender issues. English, I localize from English, right? So English is much more concise language than Portuguese, because Portuguese, usually when you translate it, it can have up to 30% more characters, and this makes localization very difficult, especially when you don't have access to much context about what you are translating. So if you don't have pictures or at least some string IDs that will help you identify where that information is displayed or what it relates to, then it can be really hard to localize in a concise manner without leaving out important information. And gender issues is something that basically the vast majority of our nouns are gendered in Portuguese, and we also and when we translate adjectives, they will also be gendered according to the noun. So this is really challenging. It's almost certain that if Brazilian Portuguese localizers receive a list of characters they want to translate, they probably need to ask what the gender of those characters are, because it can be really hard to translate them neutrally. Some nouns can be neutral, but not all of them. And if you are writing a sentence, it can be even harder to make it gender neutral. So we always try to find out what the gender of the characters are. And about your second question, so if we remember about, if we recall about Street Fighter, the fighting game, there is a Brazilian character in Street Fighter, and that Brazilian character is a monster in the Amazon. So it really helps to create this idea that Brazil is like a big jungle with monsters and things like that. So so usually the picture that happens and outside when foreign developers want to write about Brazil is that they draw from those stereotypes, like it's a jungle, it's a very poor country and things like that, which really isn't true, right? People also draw from the football stereotype, and for me it's okay because I really enjoy football. I'm a typical Brazilian in that aspect because I love football, watch it every Sunday. So, but it's not all of us are really that much into football.
Yeah, cool, Diego. Thank you. And now I have another thing that I think will just a bit to broaden this picture. So you mentioned stereotypes, and it's a very interesting topic because yes, I guess every country and every culture has its stereotypes, how it's portrayed in the world. And from my perspective, the truth is that some of the stereotypes are a bit just about true. They grow from something, and some are not. And so if I'd ask you to portray, so what is special just about the Brazilian culture, and what makes your people special? What is just what is special about them? What key traits would you just underline? And maybe they have even some linguistic just representation, as you know, some special words in various languages that so they couldn't be translated because they are just about some concept fact that it's key in the cultural picture of the speakers of this language. So what would you tell?
Thank you for that question, Feder. Well, I would say that the most interesting aspect of Brazilian people in general is that we are really approachable. We are really a welcoming country, both to tourists and to one another. And it's easy to start a conversation with someone from Brazil, because we are really open to talk, and we are also very warm with touching people and one another. So I think that's really special about us, and that's why some of the stereotypes about Brazilian being a party people, so that we like to party a lot, and that's also true to a point. We play hard and work hard. So I think that's one of the most interesting aspects. I think that can distinguish Brazilian people. We welcome basically all nationalities in Brazil. We have absolutely no prejudice with where people are from. This is really nice. It's something I like to highlight.
Thank you, Diego. I wish sometime I would like to visit Brazil and check how it works just in reality, to touch it with my fingers and see it with my eyes. Let's touch some other topics, business related, I think. So you are an independent localizer, and while you as I can see, you work quite consistently on your personal brand to just increase your sales funnel, to make more sales and sell your services more expensive, to earn more money. And there is a list of questions here. So first of all, why didn't you at some point form a company? So why didn't you decide that now we need I need some people to work with me for we can make more work?
Okay, actually I work, I don't have any collaborators with me. I work only by myself, and with multiple companies providing services here and there. And I think that is the most important thing for a freelancer, to have different income streams, because you can't always rely on one client or the other. You just have to diversify, because the work demand can really fluctuate, and if you're not prepared to that, it can lead to a lot of things, such as anxiety, like the feast or famine cycle that people mention. That you either have a lot to work on, or you have almost 1 month without any work. So this can be a true challenge for freelancers. And the way I found to deal with that was to have a good relationship with partners that can count on me or when they need, and I can count them when I need them too.
So, but you don't think that you just need to do some bigger business? So just to be short and concise, are you happy with the setup you work now, or you see this something as you have some plan to develop it into something bigger? Or
yes, I think it's thinking about the long term as an independent translator. I think that building a business is something that you inevitably have to do. I think it's really part of freelance work in general. But I would also say that this kind of entrepreneurship is not for everyone. I have personally met a lot of translators who would rather stay at a company or 1 or 2 companies without having to deal with all the challenge of finding clients and maintaining relationships and being constantly available to them. So I think that's really that really depends on each person, right? So for me, the biggest challenge of forming an agency right now is that developers, when they hire an agency, they tend to look for an agency that can take care of all languages they have, right? So if I'm not prepared to offer localization into Italian or Russian or Spanish, then it can be harder to find clients. At least from my experience, it's harder to offer services when you only have one language to offer. They tend to want to optimize their operations under one agency that can take care of all languages they want to localize into.
It's interesting. Yes, because from my perspective, so on such big markets as Brazil is that there is demand for single language companies, just because it's first of all, if we take key players from States or from Europe or from China, they usually that's something not in their country and not in their region, and they find it as something not very understandable, and they sometimes love to have a single language company and just in their pool. So that's just my idea to you, that just having an agency maybe is not equal to having a multilingual agency. But it is my viewpoint, just because I personally at some point understood that I am too lazy to translate. I don't want it, and what I have fun of is finding people who have fun of translating and just organize everything that they have fun and they have money on time and just all this stuff.
Yes, most single language agencies from Brazil that I know, they usually have partnerships with multilingual agencies. I think that's a very common thing here in Brazil, that they provide services to a bigger agency.
Two keywords.
Yeah.
Okay, let's name things what they are.
Yeah.
Autoline bridge. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are the biggest names out there in the localization industry, and so when at some point I started looking for specifically Brazilian localization agencies, and they had this problem because the work they were doing were already outsourced to them, sometimes by multiple tiers of agencies. That's something that happens too. Agency C provides service to agency B, that provides services to agency A, that finally serves the client. So this is something this kind of cascade is something that is, from my experience, is really common here in Brazil.
Yeah, and it's common not only in Brazil, but in all the world, just, and because it's very segmented market, and many things just depends on who have discussed with whom, who have discussed with whom, and who buys which languages from which sources. But getting back to you and your story as an independent localizer, so Diego, please tell us at which point you understood that you need to develop your personal brand, and what was the change? So what was the change in your daily routines? How you started work differently, and just what was the change in results? So did you start to get more work, or did you start to get paid more, or just what was influence? What was impact of this decision?
Okay, so I had a steady work coming to me when I first decided to develop my brand. But I had already been a localizer for about 5 or 6 years at that point. So really, I was looking for the next step in my career because my rates they were not increasing at that time. I was very experienced. I had worked on a lot of famous games at that time, and I really felt that there was no challenge in Brazilian Portuguese that I could not take care of. I felt I was prepared for everything that developers or other localization agencies could throw at me. So that's when I started looking for the market as a whole. That's when I realized I had to expand my services to reach the next step in my career. I think that was my biggest motivation at the time, because I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to earn more at the time, and I knew that rates could be better than what I had at the time. So that's when I started looking for things that could help me at the time. And the main thing that helped me at the time was finally updating my profile on LinkedIn. I had completely neglected that social network by then. I felt that it was a dying social network, that there were not much going on there. But then I heard from some colleagues that LinkedIn was really good, was really the place to be at the time. So I started updating my profile. I already had a profile on ProZ, and I went back to ProZ to start looking for other clients. But what really helped me was LinkedIn, because I connected to other localization specialists and other translators who were doing things differently, and I started learning from them based on that. And that's when I started selling my expertise, because I realized there was a lot. I had a lot of knowledge from the industry and from from translation itself, the linguistic part of translation. And that's when I started sharing everything I knew on LinkedIn and building my personal brand. And it really brought me much more results than I was expecting. To be honest, I didn't know that the localization industry was so big. I thought that were much fewer agencies than actually there were. And when I started updating my profile and working on LinkedIn posts and doing everything that I was advised on, clients eventually came to me. That was the main shift, when I was not chasing after clients or agencies, and they were reaching me out on LinkedIn or by email. That was when I felt that my work had been paying off. So and I do encourage anyone to do that.
And so, what tools do you use in your promotion? So LinkedIn. So what else? So social networks, websites, TikTok, whatever.
Yeah. Right now, I'm only selling through LinkedIn, because I'm already since I'm fulfilling a part-time contract. I'm not able to dedicate so much time to selling online. I have to spend half of my business work hours translating. So I'm using mainly LinkedIn right now, and ProZ. I have an updated profile there. I work on receiving reviews from clients I provide services for. So I'm using LinkedIn right now, and I'm also I'll be lecturing a course next month on game localization, right? And that is also something that LinkedIn brought, because I was approached by Translators at the end of last year to teach a course on game localization, and that is a direct result from my self promotion on LinkedIn, because I was able to picture myself as a professional with a lot of knowledge in this particular field, and that was what was drawing clients to me. So this is my main thing right now. But once the part-time contract is over, or once I have more available time, I intend to promote my business elsewhere too.
Thank you, Diego. And another thing that's buzzing last months into LinkedIn, you mentioned, for example, and other social networks, it's the translators and credits thing. Of course, I understand that if I ask you what do you think about it, you'll say that it's cool. But let's just try to get more extensive answer. So what do you think about these just initiatives, moves? What gives results and what doesn't give results, and your view on how it's evolving? So,
well, how should I start? Translating the credits, like I said, I'm 100% on board with this, and actually, a major part of the results I got from advancing my career was that I was featured on some big names, on some big titles like Final Fantasy VII Remake, StarCraft Remastered, Watch Dogs Legion. I was credited on all these games, and as far as I know, at least 15 or more. And this truly helped me so that other clients or other language service providers could look at me as a professional with a lot of experience that has worked on complex titles with a lot of different workflows, some of them with proprietary software. And this is really something that helped me. And I can totally feel, I know a lot of translators. I personally know a lot of translators who have been in the industry for more than 5 years, and they worked on big names and on big projects, but they do not have the means to prove that they have worked on these titles and to prove the experience they had. So, of course, a translation test would probably show their expertise, but many of them do not get until the translation test part of the recruitment process, because their curriculum is just simply doesn't show the experience they actually have. So I think it's truly important to have the translators get featured in the credits. I understand that some developers are reluctant to do that for some varying reasons, but I think this movement of promoting translator in the credits, I think it's gaining momentum right now, and I think we are moving towards a part that developers look into localization as a part of the creative process. So they feature the localization specialists as much as they would feature their artists, their writers, their programmers, and that's how I feel about the translators in the credits movement.
Okay, Diego, and thank you. And now a tricky part what do you think? So, how soon the only translator in credits and also the narrative designer, his friend, will be ChatGPT, the different versions. So, and the usual question, I think, in any language talks, yes, and there are wise people who make studies, who evaluate machine translation quality, blah blah blah. Very interesting, very big numbers there. But from your perspective, from your personal, so like I talked today, you, Diego Perez, what do you think about it, and how it has influenced your life at the point, or not even have influenced, or so how much requests for post-editing have you been receiving lately, and just have you been accepting them? And by the way, if you have accepted a single one of them, what do you think about the general quality of machine translation into Portuguese? So that's the technical part.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that the breakthroughs in artificial intelligence in the translation, I think they are they are good in that it makes language and makes content more accessible to people as a whole, right? So it's inevitable that we need some form of machine translation for a lot of things, right? Even if it's just for translating a post on a social media that you do not understand the language, then you can translate that as a user with a machine translation. I think this is something really powerful that tends to bring the world together. But when we're talking about creative translation, I think there are a lot of aspects we have to consider. Even if the semantics or the syntax is correct, there's the creative part that you have to adapt, especially to a culture, right? So like I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, Brazil is not a particular sensitive country to different themes and subjects. But a lot of countries are, and how do you deal with that? Because inappropriateness can be done in a subtle way that the machine can detect, and so how do we approach that, right? So this is where I stand on machine translation. I think that it will help us make content more accessible to people as a whole. But when the developers write something in a particular way, they want to convey that idea in their local markets in the same way. So it's not just about translating words that are grammatically correct. It's about translating style. It's about translating tone. It's about translating voice. And I think that games are precious things in that, especially those that are more centered towards narrative or player experience. And I don't think that, at least for now, I don't think that machine translation can convey that same level of making a game feel like it was produced in their native language. Because that's what we try to do as localizers, that players have the experience like they were playing a game that was developed in Portuguese or a game that was developed in Russian. It's not just about understanding what is written in a message, what is written in the menu. It's about having a similar experience of those that are in the native language that the game was produced on.
Okay, thank you, Diego. So noted down into my collection of opinions just about technical future of our industry, some small thing that I wanted to check the view. All this talk, and we are talking about your language and your culture, and they are talking about Portuguese, but that, as far as I know from all my years in the localization industry, that Brazilian Portuguese is quite different from a European one. But I guess you probably have some funny or not very funny moments just connected when the different versions of Portuguese were mixed up. And so please tell us.
Yeah, that's something that happens a lot. It's from what I hear from my Portuguese colleagues in Europe, it's more common to happen the other way around. They get a request to translate into Portuguese or reveal a Portuguese translation, and then when they open the file, they realize that actually the request was for Brazilian Portuguese and not for European Portuguese. So this is something that happens. Developers and usually tend to choose Brazilian Portuguese if they have to pick one or the other, because of the number of the population that is just so vastly different. And also another thing that happens is that Portugal has more access to Brazilian content. For example, some of our TV series are broadcast on Portugal as well. So this is something that I personally heard from Portuguese people, is that they are more familiar with our language variant than the other way around. And that's really true, because sometimes I have trouble understanding what people from Portuguese are speaking. They have to speak a bit slower so I can understand. It's almost like a different language to me. But we can understand one another, and if we are reading written content in Portuguese, we can understand the other variants just fine. But it's really obvious when it's not Brazilian or when it's not European. We can tell that right from the start, because some words, they have different meanings. That same word can have different connotations in one or the other, and also the verb conjugation and things like that. They can be really different.
And did you have some literature in your university course?
Yes.
And so you have the Brazilian writers or the Brazilian and Portuguese writers in your course, or just how it works?
We have both. We have both, especially because when we're talking about literature, Portuguese literature has had a significant impact on Brazilian literature when we're talking about centuries back, because that's where the main writers were at the time. Okay, so we just study both authors, because they are all part of the Portuguese language.
And what reading classical Portuguese literature nowadays? So how it feels? Is there any shift? Then you understand that it's the old Portuguese from Portugal, and it just evolves, and now it becomes a Brazilian Portuguese, that with some writers, for example.
It can be really difficult. It can be really difficult to read if you think about Camões, for example, which is probably the most illustrious Portuguese writer. The language is just so different. That we have trouble understanding that. So and all our classes in my graduation years were really about deciphering what all those verses were about, and what and how they related to Portuguese society. And that's my favorite part of literature, of course, is when we are reading the author and we're looking at their work, relating that to the culture they were living in. So this was all part of our studies too.
Okay. Thank you, Diego. Thank you, and thanks everyone who was with us today. We hope that you found something interesting, and of course we are eager to hear your feedback, especially after this first episode. So please write an email. The address is podcast@levsha.eu, and you'll find it in the podcast description. And share your thoughts. What was good? What was not so good? And which topics do you find especially interesting? In the next episode, we'll speak with Alain Delepiane, an Italian localizer living in Japan, and the man who created many community initiatives in the localization industry, including Log Jam and Localization Cafe. Stay tuned.